The night seemed quiet, but inside that house chaos was taking a deep breath. A scream cut through the air, revealing a fear that had been hidden in silence for months. She fell, shielding her son in her arms, as the truth revealed itself on a cracked cell phone screen. And on the other end of the call, someone saw everything and was about to act. If this story grabbed you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. The early morning hours in Portland, Oregon had that heavy silence that only exists when the entire city seems to be breathing in the same slow rhythm. In the Selwood neighborhood, the middle-class houses slept peacefully, lined up like guardians of secrets no one wanted to know. But on that night, a scream sliced through the air like an invisible blade. It wasn't an ordinary scream. It was the kind of sound that freezes your blood, that makes neighbors wake up with their hearts pounding and pretend they heard nothing. The kind of sound that carries within it the weight of months, maybe years of forced silence. Inside the small two-story house with the green gate, Sarah held Leo against her chest with a strength that came from somewhere beyond her body. The 6-month-old baby cried in terror, not understanding why the world around him had turned to chaos. Sarah's 7-month belly threw her off balance, but she wouldn't let go of her son. Not now. Not when everything was crumbling around her for the last time. Mark was unhinged. His eyes were red, his voice hoarse from screaming, his hands trembling. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't understand how she dared to want to leave, how she dared to think of taking his children, of starting a new life far away. For him, this wasn't the end of a relationship. It was an unforgivable betrayal. The words he spewed echoed off the walls, senseless accusations, empty promises, threats disguised as pleas. Sarah tried to reason with him, but her voice wouldn't come out. Fear had taken over everything. And in the doorway, watching it all with a cold expression that contrasted with the desperation in the air, was Jessica. The woman Mark had brought into Sarah's life as just a friend, but who had slowly revealed herself to be much more. Jessica didn't scream. She didn't need to. Her words were whispered, venomous, calculated. She egged Mark on with sweet phrases that hid a silent cruelty. She wanted Sarah to feel small, invisible, guilty. Sarah felt her legs give out. The pressure in her chest was building, her breath catching. Leo cried louder, as if sensing that something was terribly wrong. And then Sarah's world went dark. She fell. Her body collapsed onto the cold living room floor, protecting Leo until the very last second. The baby kept crying, now with an even sharper, more desperate sound. Mark froze for a moment, staring at the scene, not knowing what to do. Jessica just watched, impassive. What neither of them knew was that, thrown in the corner of the room during the chaos, Sarah's cell phone was still on. The cracked screen showed an active video call, and on the other end of that call, hundreds of yards away, Chris saw everything. Chris, Sarah's brother, a police officer who was off duty that night, had called his sister after getting a strange text from her hours earlier, a message that just said, "If something happens, take care of Leo." He had kept calling until she answered, but what he saw on the screen made him jump out of bed and race to the nearest patrol car. Sarah unconscious on the floor, Leo crying, Mark screaming, and that woman standing in the doorway like a silent shadow. Chris drove like he had never driven before. He radioed his colleagues, called for backup, but he was the first to arrive. His heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear his own thoughts. This wasn't just another call. This was his sister, his nephew, the family he had sworn to protect when their parents died years ago, leaving Sarah alone at 23. When Chris pulled his patrol car up in front of the house, he saw something that made him hesitate for a split second. The door was ajar, and from inside came not screams, but Leo's incessant crying, a cry that pierced the soul. Chris went in. Mark tried to say something, but Chris wasn't there to hear excuses. He went straight to Sarah, checked that she was still breathing, scooped Leo into his arms, and called for an ambulance. Jessica tried to slip out the back door, but Chris stopped her with a look that needed no words. The paramedics arrived quickly. Sarah was rushed to Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center, still unconscious, while Leo was calmed by Chris, who wouldn't let his nephew go for a second. Mark was restrained and taken in for questioning. Jessica remained silent, but her eyes betrayed something Chris couldn't decipher at that moment. Fear, regret, or just the cold calculation of someone who knows they've been caught red-handed. Sarah woke up hours later, under the stark, impersonal white light of a hospital room. Her head ached. Her whole body ached. But what hurt most was the shame. The shame of having let it get this far. The shame of having taken so long to make a decision she knew, deep down, she should have made long ago. Beside the bed, Chris was holding Leo, who was finally sleeping peacefully in his uncle's arms. Sarah tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't respond. She was exhausted in a way that went far beyond the physical. "Chris, honey, I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice weak, her eyes filling with tears she tried in vain to hold back. "Don't say that, sir, not now," Chris replied, using the childhood nickname only he still used. "You're safe. Leo's safe. The baby's fine too. The doctor's checked. Everything's okay with him." Sarah placed a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movement of the son who was yet to come. The tears rolled freely now. It wasn't relief, it wasn't peace, it was just the exhaustion of someone who had finally stopped fighting alone. But there was someone else in the room. A man with a serene expression but tired eyes was leaning against the wall near the window. Sarah looked at him, not understanding who he was. "That's David, Sarah. He lives next door to you," Chris explained. "He was the one who came in while I was still on my way. He's the one who grabbed Leo and stopped. Well, he helped a lot." David approached slowly, as if afraid of startling Sarah. He looked like a man who had seen a lot in his life, graying at the temples, a rigid posture, but at the same time a softness in his eyes that contrasted with everything else. "I just did what anyone should do," David said, his voice calm and deep. "I heard your son's cry. I couldn't ignore it." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had never really spoken to this man. She knew he lived alone, that he was quiet, that she sometimes saw him watering the plants in his yard at 6 in the morning. But she never imagined he would be the person who, in that moment of desperation, would have the courage to do what so many neighbors pretend not to see. "Thank you," was all Sarah could manage to say. David just nodded and left the room, leaving the siblings alone. Chris settled Leo into the makeshift bassinet the hospital had brought and sat in the chair next to Sarah's bed. "Sir, we need to talk about what happened," Chris began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I saw everything. The call stayed on. I saw how he treated you. I saw that woman there. I'm not letting you go back to that house, not while he's around." Sarah closed her eyes. She knew this moment was coming. She knew she would have to tell him everything. But where to begin? How to explain that she had reached this point not out of weakness, but because the hope that things would get better had kept her trapped for too long? "It started slowly over a year ago," Sarah said, her voice choked with emotion. "He wasn't like this in the beginning, or maybe he was, and I just didn't want to see it. He was attentive, protective. After Leo was born, everything changed. He started to get different, more controlling. He wanted to know where I was all the time. He got jealous of everything, and when I got pregnant again, he got even worse." Chris squeezed his sister's hand, feeling the weight of every word. "And this Jessica woman?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "She showed up about 6 months ago. He said she was just a friend, that I was overreacting. But I saw the way she looked at him, and the way he looked at her. They started spending more time together. And when I questioned it, he said I was crazy, that it was all in my head, that I was obsessed. Until I saw the texts, I saw everything. And when I confronted him, he told me it was my fault, that if I were a better partner, he wouldn't need her." Sarah's voice broke. Chris stood up and hugged her, letting her cry on his shoulder like she hadn't in years. "You're not to blame for any of this, Sar. None of this is your fault. And now we're going to handle this the right way. He's going to answer for what he did. He's not getting near you or the boys ever again." Sarah wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe it was that simple, that all she had to do was report him, that the system would work, that she would truly be safe. But deep down, a part of her was still afraid that Mark would find a way to come back, afraid that things wouldn't really change. In the following days, Sarah remained in the hospital for observation. The doctors wanted to be sure that both she and the baby were stable. Leo stayed with Chris during the day, and at night David would show up with things Sarah didn't even know she needed. A clean change of clothes, a warmer blanket, a book to pass the time. Small gestures that said more than words. Chris handled all the paperwork. He filed the police report, gathered the evidence, talked to lawyers. Mark was charged and would be held without bail, as the situation was considered high risk for the victim. Jessica also gave a statement, but her version was confusing, full of contradictions. Chris suspected there was much more to the story than she was willing to tell at that moment. Sarah was discharged after 5 days, but where could she go? Going back to the house was out of the question. The place was too scarred by bad memories. Chris suggested she stay at his apartment for a while, but it was small and he worked irregular shifts. That's when David made an unexpected offer. "I have a spare room in my house. It's simple, but it's safe. You can stay there as long as you need. No strings attached, no pressure," he said. With that calmness, Sarah was starting to find comforting. Sarah hesitated. Accepting help from a stranger seemed risky. But David wasn't a complete stranger anymore, was he? He had risked his own safety to save Leo. And there was something in the way he looked at her, not with pity but with a quiet respect she hadn't felt in a long time. "I accept," Sarah said, surprising herself, "but only until I can get on my feet. I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." David smiled for the first time. It was a small but genuine smile. Kindness isn't something you take advantage of. It's something you share. And so Sarah and Leo moved into the house next door to what was once their home. It was strange to be so close and yet so far away. From the window of the room David had prepared for her, Sarah could see the house where she had lived with Mark. But now that place seemed to belong to another life. To a Sarah she was trying to leave behind. The first few days were hard. Sarah would wake up in the middle of the night thinking she heard Mark's voice. She had nightmares where he came back and took Leo away. Chris visited her every day, bringing updates on the case. David, for his part, respected her space. He didn't ask invasive questions. He was just there, present without being suffocating. It was on a Sunday afternoon that Sarah finally had a real conversation with David. Leo was napping after lunch, and she was in the kitchen trying to make coffee when he came in. "Can I ask you a question?" David said, as he took 2 mugs from the cabinet. "Of course." "Why did you stay so long?" he asked, and before Sarah could feel judged, he continued. "I'm not judging you, I'm just trying to understand, because I've seen a lot of stories like yours, and I know it's never simple." Sarah sighed, stirring sugar into a coffee she wasn't even sure she wanted to drink. "Because I thought I could fix it. I thought if I was patient, if I was understanding, if I tried harder, he would go back to being the person I met in the beginning. And by the time I realized that person might have never really existed, I was already pregnant with Leo. And then, pregnant again. And then it gets harder. Because it's not just about me, it's about them. And I was afraid of what he would do if I tried to leave." David nodded, as if every word made sense to him in a way few people could understand. "I understand more than you know," he said. "I've been on the other side, not as an abuser but as a witness. I saw a lot when I was in the army. I saw women and children trapped in impossible situations, and I learned that courage isn't never being afraid. Courage is being afraid and still doing what needs to be done. And you did that, Sarah. You were brave." Sarah felt her eyes sting. No one had ever said that to her. Everyone always asked why she took so long. No one had ever acknowledged that leaving was the hardest part. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat there in silence, drinking coffee as the afternoon wore on, and Sarah realized that for the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was just peaceful. But the peace wouldn't last long, because outside, away from Sarah's eyes, Chris received news that made him call his sister immediately. "Sir, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice tense. "Mark got a lawyer, and he's filing for custody of Leo. He's saying you're a negligent mother, that you abandoned the house, that you're putting your son at risk by staying in a stranger's house." Sarah felt the world spin. How dare he? How did he have the nerve to do this after everything? "But we have proof, Chris. We have the video from the call. We have the police report. We have everything," Sarah said, trying to stay calm. "I know, and we're going to use all of it. But I need you to be prepared. This is going to get ugly before it gets better, and he's not going to give up easily." Sarah hung up the phone and looked at Leo, who was playing on the floor with a teddy bear David had bought for him. Her son. Her baby. The reason she had found the strength to leave. And now Mark wanted to take that from her too. No, Sarah thought. Not this time. David walked into the room and immediately knew something was wrong. Sarah told him everything, her voice trembling but firm, and for the first time she saw a controlled anger in his eyes. "He won't succeed," David said. "We won't let him." And right there, in that moment, Sarah understood that she was no longer alone. She had Chris, she had David, and she had herself, a version of herself that was learning not to bow to fear anymore. That night, after Leo finally fell asleep, Sarah sat on David's porch, watching the stars that dotted the Portland sky. It was a clear, cold night, the kind that makes you wrap yourself in blankets and think about life. David came out with 2 cups of hot tea and sat next to her, keeping a respectful distance. "You're thinking about him, aren't you?" David asked, without looking directly at her. Sarah nodded, holding the warm mug between her hands, as if it could somehow warm the cold she felt inside. "I keep thinking about how I let it get to this point, how I didn't see the signs sooner. My mum always said you recognize people's character in the small gestures, in the little things. And I saw so many signs, David, so many, but I ignored them all." David took a sip of his tea before answering. "We always ignore the signs when we're in love, or when we want to believe the person will change. It's not your fault for believing in the best in him. It's his fault for not being worthy of that trust. But now he wants to take my son from me," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "He wants to make me look like the villain in this story, and the worst part is, part of me is afraid he'll succeed, because society always judges the woman, always asks why she stayed, why she didn't leave sooner, why she didn't scream louder. No one ever asks why he thought he had the right to do what he did." David turned to her for the first time, and his eyes were serious, determined. "Listen, Sarah. You're a survivor, not a victim, a survivor. And survivors don't and give up. You got out. You protected your son. You're here, breathing, fighting. That's more than a lot of people manage to do. And as for what other people will think, let them think. Because at the end of the day, the only opinion that matters is Leo's. And when he grows up, he'll know he had a mother who did everything to keep him safe." Sarah felt tears stream down her face, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude. Gratitude for having found in the most unlikely of places people who believed in her when she doubted herself. "Thank you, David, for everything, for the house, for the support, for listening to me. You didn't even know me, and yet you opened your doors." David smiled, that small smile Sarah was getting to know. Sometimes you get to know people not by the time you spend with them, but by the situations that reveal who they are. And you revealed yourself to be strong, Sarah, stronger than you believe. They stayed there for a few more hours, talking about things big and small. David told her about his time in the army, about the things he saw, about why he chose to live a simpler, quieter life after retiring. Sarah told him about her childhood, about losing her parents, about how Chris had always been her protector despite being only 2 years older. And for the first time since everything had started, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was hope. The small, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild her life. But the road ahead was still long, and the coming weeks would bring challenges that would test every ounce of strength she had found. "Tell me what you think of this story and how you think it will end." The following week brought a routine Sarah never imagined living. Waking up early with Leo, making breakfast in David's kitchen, getting visits from Chris with stacks of documents she needed to sign. It was a strange life, suspended between the past she was trying to forget and a future she couldn't yet visualize. The custody case for Leo moved forward slowly and bureaucratically, as things often do in the American legal system. The lawyer Chris had found, Michael Davis, was a middle-aged man experienced in family law, but with a brutal honesty that sometimes scared Sarah. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said during their first meeting, which took place at David's kitchen table. "The fact that you're living in the house of a man who isn't a relative can be used against you. Mark's defense will try to paint this as instability, as a lack of a proper environment to raise a child." Sarah's stomach churned. David, who was in the living room with Leo, seemed to overhear the conversation and came into the kitchen. "I have a suggestion," David said, looking at the lawyer. "I can provide references. I have 20 years of honorable military service. I have no criminal record. I can undergo any psychological evaluation necessary. If it helps prove that this is a safe environment for Leo, I'll do it." Michael Davis looked at David with an expression of surprise and respect. "That would help a lot, a great deal. And there's something else," he said, turning to Sarah. "We need to build a solid narrative. It's not enough to prove you're a good mother. We need to prove that he is a threat to Leo, and for that we need Jessica." "Jessica?" Sarah repeated, confused. "Why?" "Because she was there. She witnessed everything. And if she's willing to testify in your favor, showing there was a pattern of inappropriate behavior, it changes the entire game." "But she'll never do that," Sarah said, feeling her frustration grow. "She was on his side. She hated me." "People change sides when they realize they're being used," Chris interjected. "And I'm pretty sure she's starting to realize that." Indeed, Jessica was realizing many things. In the days following the incident, she had tried to visit Mark a few times, but he treated her coldly as if she were just another disposable piece on his chessboard. When she tried to talk about their future, he changed the subject. When she asked if he still wanted her around, he said he needed to focus on getting his family back. His family. The words burned in Jessica like acid. She had destroyed her own relationship, pushed away friends, lied to her own family, all because Mark had promised they would be together as soon as he got rid of Sarah. But now, seeing the situation from the outside, Jessica was beginning to understand that it had never been about her. It was about control. Mark didn't want Sarah because he loved her. He wanted her because he couldn't stand the idea of losing her to someone else, of losing control over the narrative of his own life. And Jessica was just a means to an end, a way to destabilize Sarah, to make her feel inadequate, to create an excuse for his behavior. When this realization finally sank in, Jessica did something that surprised even herself. She called Chris. "Hello?" Chris answered, suspicious of the unknown number. "Chris, it's Jessica. I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need to talk to you about Mark, about everything." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Jessica almost hung up, thinking he wasn't interested. But then Chris spoke. "I'm listening." "I have recordings," Jessica said, her voice trembling. "Conversations between him and me, texts, plans, things he said about Sarah, things he said he would do if she tried to leave. I saved everything because I thought one day I might need to protect myself, and I was right." Chris sat up, straighter in his chair, now fully alert. "What kind of things?" "Plans to manipulate the situation, to make it seem like Sarah was unstable. He even talked about using Leo as a way to keep her around, to make her feel like she had no choice. He knew exactly what he was doing, Chris. It wasn't a fit of rage, it was calculated." "Why are you telling me this now?" Chris asked, still wary. "Because I was an idiot," Jessica replied, and for the first time her voice sounded genuinely remorseful. "Because I believed his lies, because I thought he loved me. But he doesn't love anyone but himself. And now he's trying to take Sarah's son, and I know if he succeeds, it will just be another form of control. I can't let that happen, not after everything I've already done." Chris arranged to meet Jessica the next day at Michael Davis's office. When he told Sarah, she was in shock. "Do you believe her?" Sarah asked, hugging Leo to her chest as she rocked him to sleep. "I don't know if I believe her," Chris answered honestly. "But if she has proof, we need to see it. This could change everything, sir." The next day, Jessica arrived at the lawyer's office with a folder full of printed documents and a flash drive with audio files. She looked different from the last time Sarah had seen her. Thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back carelessly. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. When her eyes met Sarah's, Jessica hesitated. There was so much to say, so many apologies to make, but the words wouldn't come. "I'm so sorry," was all she managed to say. "I'm so sorry for everything." Sarah didn't answer right. Away. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw in Jessica's face everything she had been through, but another part, the part that was learning to let go of the past, just nodded. Michael Davis asked Jessica to show them what she had, and what she showed left everyone in the room speechless. There were hours of recordings, conversations where Mark planned exactly how to make Sarah feel guilty, how to isolate her from family and friends, how to use the pregnancy to keep her dependent. Texts where he explicitly said he would never let her leave with the children, that he would do whatever it took to stop her. "This is gold," Michael Davis said, looking at the transcripts Jessica had made. "With this, we not only secure custody for Sarah, but we can also get a permanent restraining order. He won't be able to get near her or the children ever again." Sarah listened in silence, processing every word. It was surreal to realize the level of manipulation she had been subjected to, and at the same time, it was liberating, because now she had proof. It was no longer just her word against his. Now there was concrete evidence of everything. "Jessica will have to testify," Michael Davis explained, "and it will be tough. The defense will try to discredit her, say she's getting revenge because she was rejected. But if she holds firm, if she shows she's genuinely sorry and wants to do the right thing, that carries a lot of weight." "I'll testify," Jessica said, with a determination that surprised even herself. "I'll tell them everything, every lie, every manipulation, everything." In the following weeks, Sarah's life took on a new routine. She started therapy, something Michael Davis had suggested not only to help her process the trauma, but also because it would show the judge she was taking care of her own mental health. The therapist, Dr. Evans, was a woman in her 50s with a soft voice and an attentive gaze. "Sarah, you need to understand something," Dr. Evans said during one of their sessions. "What you experienced wasn't a difficult relationship. It was psychological abuse, and the first step to healing is to call things by their proper names." Sarah cried a lot in that session. She cried for the woman she had been, for the lost innocence, for the time that would never come back. But she also cried with relief to finally have someone who validated her feelings, who didn't judge her, who understood. At home, or rather, at David's house, things were changing too. Leo had grown attached to David in a way that surprised Sarah. The baby would smile when he saw David come home from the store, reach his little arms out for him, and sleep better when David sang old lullabies he said he learned from his grandmother. And Sarah? Sarah was starting to feel something she wasn't sure she should feel. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a connection, an admiration for the way David was kind without being condescending, how he supported her without trying to control her, how he looked at her and saw not a victim, but a whole, complex, strong person. One night, after Leo had fallen asleep, Sarah and David were on the porch again, in what was becoming their favorite routine, talking under the stars, with no pressure, no expectations. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Of course. Why did you never get married, never have kids?" David was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much he wanted to share. "I almost got married once," he began. "I was young, just starting in the army. She was a nurse. We were in love, or at least I thought it was love. But the job took me far away, on missions I couldn't talk about, to places that changed who I was. When I came back, I was a different person, and she realized it before I did. She ended it, said the man she loved had been left behind somewhere in the world, and she was right." Sarah's heart ached. "Did you regret it?" "No," David answered honestly. "Because over time I realized she did the right thing. I wasn't ready to be the partner she deserved. I was too hurt, too closed off. I spent years like that, Sarah, years living on autopilot, not connecting with anyone, until I retired, bought this house, and decided I was going to try to really live, not just exist." "And did you succeed?" Sarah asked. David looked at her, and there was something different in his eyes, something vulnerable. "I'm trying," he said softly. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged with possibilities, with unsaid things that hung in the air between them. Sarah felt the urge to move closer, to touch his hand, to thank him for everything in a way words couldn't express. But she didn't. Not yet. It was still too soon, and she needed to heal first. Meanwhile, behind the scenes of the legal system, things were moving forward. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks from then. Mark, through his lawyer, continued to argue that Sarah was unstable, that she had abandoned their home, that she was exposing their son to inappropriate situations. But Michael Davis's team was prepared. They had Jessica's recordings. They had the video from Chris's call that night. They had medical reports from Child Protective Services, CPS, attesting that Leo was healthy and well cared for, and psychological evaluations of both Sarah and David that showed it was a safe and stable environment. Chris worked tirelessly, gathering every piece of evidence, talking to neighbors who could testify about Mark's behavior. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Peterson, a 70-year-old woman who had lived on the street for decades, said she had heard arguments coming from Sarah's house several times, but had never had the courage to do anything. "I regret it every day," Mrs. Peterson said with tears in her eyes. "I should have called the police. I should have done something. But you always think it's not your business, you know. And now I see that it should have been." Chris hugged her and thanked her. Every testimony mattered. Every piece of the puzzle helped build the real picture of what had happened. The date of the hearing approached. Sarah was nervous, but also determined. She rehearsed her testimony with Michael Davis dozens of times. She learned to tell her story clearly, objectively, without letting her emotions get the best of her at the wrong moment. "You're going to look at the judge, not at Mark," Michael Davis instructed. "You're going to tell the truth, calmly. And when the defense tries to destabilize you, and they will try, you take a deep breath and answer only what was asked. Nothing more." Sarah nodded, mentally repeating the instructions like a mantra. On the eve of the hearing, David made a special dinner. Nothing too elaborate, but made with care. Roast chicken with potatoes, and for dessert a pudding, he said, was his grandmother's recipe. "You need to eat well and sleep well tonight," he said, serving Sarah's plate. "Tomorrow is a big day." "I know," Sarah replied, but her stomach was in such a knot she could barely think about food. "What if it goes wrong, David? What if the judge believes him?" David stopped what he was doing and sat across from her. "It won't go wrong. You have the entire truth on your side. You have proof. You have witnesses. And most importantly, you have strength. The same strength that made you walk out of that house with Leo in your arms. The same strength that makes you wake up every day and keep going even when everything seems impossible. That strength won't abandon you tomorrow." Sarah felt her eyes well up with tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude. She stood up, went over to David, and for the first time she hugged him. A long, tight hug, full of everything she couldn't say in words. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." David returned the hug, and in that moment something shifted between them. It was no longer just a relationship of help. It was something deeper, more real, but they both knew this wasn't the time to name that feeling. First, Sarah had to win tomorrow's battle. After that, they would have all the time in the world to figure out what it meant. That night, Sarah barely slept. She stared at the ceiling, listening to Leo's soft breathing in the bassinet next to her bed. She thought about everything that had happened in the last few months, how her life had completely transformed, how the woman she used to be seemed like a completely different person. She remembered the first time she met Mark. It had been at a friend's party 3 years ago. He was charming, attentive, seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. In the first few months, he treated her like she was the most important person in the world. He brought her flowers for no reason, planned surprises, said she was different from everyone else. Sarah realized now that this was what experts call love bombing, a seduction technique where a person floods their partner with affection and attention to create emotional dependency. And it had worked. She had fallen completely, quickly, intensely in love. The changes started slowly. First, it was subtle comments about her clothes, her friends, her choices. Then, requests that she spend less time with her family, that she prioritize their relationship above all else. When she got pregnant with Leo, Mark was ecstatic at first. He said he would be the best father in the world, that they would have a beautiful family together. But when Leo was born and demanded all of Sarah's attention, Mark changed. He became jealous of his own son. He complained that she no longer had time for him, that the baby had become the priority, as if a newborn shouldn't be the priority. And then came the second pregnancy, unplanned. Sarah was still nursing Leo when she found out she was pregnant again. Mark reacted badly. He said she had done it on purpose to trap him, to have more control over him. The irony was cruel since he was the one controlling every aspect of her life. It was during this period that Jessica appeared, and Sarah, exhausted with 2 children to raise, one of them yet to be born, didn't have the energy to fight. She let Mark pull away, thinking maybe it was for the best, that maybe he would be calmer if he had an escape valve, but he didn't get calmer. He got worse, because now he had someone who fed his ego, who agreed with everything he said, who made him feel like Sarah was the problem. Sarah turned over in bed, trying to push these memories away. There was no point in dwelling on the past now. Tomorrow she had to look forward. She had to be strong, not just for herself, but for Leo, for the baby on the way, for all the women who were going through the same thing and had no voice. In the morning, Sarah woke to the sound of Leo crying. It was still early, the sun barely starting to peek over the horizon. She picked him up, changed his diaper, prepared his bottle. The maternal routine calmed her, gave her a sense of normalcy on a day that would be anything but normal. David was already awake, making coffee in the kitchen. He looked at Sarah with a worried expression. "Did you sleep?" "A few hours," Sarah lied. He didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Chris arrived at 8 in the morning, punctual as always. He was wearing a suit, which was rare. Sarah realized he was nervous too, trying to hide it behind a professional facade. "Ready?" he asked, trying to sound confident. "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied. Michael Davis came by the house at 9 to go over the main points of Sarah's testimony one last time. He was methodical, careful, and Sarah was grateful for that. She didn't want any surprises at the hearing. "Remember," he said for the 10th time, "answer only what is asked. Don't let them provoke you. Stay calm. The truth is on your side." Sarah nodded, repeating the instructions in her mind like a mantra. When it was time to leave, David offered to take care of Leo during the hearing. Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to leave her son, but she also knew that having him there could destabilize her emotionally. "I'll take good care of him," David promised, holding Leo with the familiarity of someone who had done it many times. "You go. Do what you need to do. And when you get back, we'll be here waiting for you." Sarah kissed Leo's forehead, took a deep breath, and walked out the door with Chris and Michael Davis. The Multnomah County Courthouse was an imposing building, full of hallways that echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps and hushed conversations. Sarah felt her heart racing, her palms sweating. Chris held her arm, a silent anchor. When they reached the courtroom, Sarah saw Mark for the first time since that night. He was sitting on the other side of the room next to his lawyer, a man in an expensive suit with an arrogant expression. Mark looked at Sarah and, for a second, she saw something in his eyes. It wasn't love, it wasn't remorse, it was possession, as if she was still his property, as if this were all just a game he was determined to win. Sarah looked away. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her intimidated. The judge entered, and everyone rose. The hearing began. Michael Davis presented Sarah's case with surgical precision. He showed the evidence, Jessica's recordings, the video from Chris's call, the medical reports. Each piece of evidence was a stone in the construction of an undeniable truth. Mark's lawyer tried to counter-argue, but his objections sounded hollow against the weight of the proof. He tried to disqualify Jessica, calling her an unreliable witness motivated by revenge. But when Jessica took the stand and began to speak, with tears in her eyes but a firm voice, even the most cynical lawyer would have had a hard time not believing her. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, she took a deep breath and walked to the stand with her legs trembling but her head held high. And then, looking directly at the judge as Michael Davis had instructed, she told her story. Every word, every moment, every piece of the truth she had held inside for so long. Sarah's voice trembled on the first few words, but then it gained strength. She told them about the early signs she had ignored, about the gradual changes in Mark's behavior, about the progressive isolation she had endured. She told them about the nights she cried alone while Leo slept, wondering if she was the one overreacting, if she was the one going crazy. The judge, a man in his 60s with a serious expression but attentive eyes, listened to every word without interruption. He took notes occasionally but kept his gaze fixed on Sarah, giving her the dignity of being truly heard. When Mark's lawyer had the opportunity to ask questions, he tried every tactic Michael Davis had predicted. He tried to make it seem like Sarah had left their home on a whim, that she was using their son as a weapon, that she had gotten involved with another man while still married. "Don't you find it convenient, ma'am, that immediately after leaving your home you went to live with a single man?" the lawyer asked in an accusatory tone. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering Michael Davis's instructions. "I didn't go to live with him for convenience or romance. I went because my life and my son's life were at risk. David offered me a safe place when I had nowhere else to go. He is an honorable man who acted out of compassion, not self-interest. And if it weren't for him, I don't know if I would be here today to tell this story." The answer was so direct and honest that even the lawyer seemed speechless for a moment. Mark was also called to testify. Sarah had listen as he told a completely distorted version of reality. According to him, Sarah was emotionally unstable, had constant crises, and was negligent with Leo. He painted himself as the victim, the man who was just trying to keep his family together while his wife cheated on him and abandoned him. It was hard for Sarah to listen to that. Every lie was like a stab wound. But she maintained her composure, holding Chris's hand under the table, reminding herself that the truth was documented, recorded, proven. Jessica also testified, and her testimony was devastating for Mark's defense. She spared no details, telling them about the manipulations, about how Mark planned to use her to destabilize Sarah, about the conversations where he made it clear he would never let Sarah leave with the children. Mark's lawyer tried to discredit her, but Jessica was prepared. She had the texts, the recordings, the precise dates of every conversation, and more importantly, she had a genuine remorse that was clear in every word. When the hearing ended, it was mid-afternoon. The judge said he would review all the evidence and issue his decision within 48 hours. Sarah left the courthouse exhausted, but with a strange sense of lightness. She had told her story. She had looked Mark in the eyes and felt not fear but pity. Pity for the empty man he was, who needed to control others to feel any sense of power. Chris hugged his sister in the parking lot. "You were incredible in there, Sar. Mum and Dad would be so proud." Sarah cried, but they were tears of relief. She had done her part. Now all that was left was to wait. When she got home, David was in the living room with Leo, who was sleeping peacefully on the couch. Upon seeing Sarah, David stood up immediately. "How did it go?" "It was, intense," Sarah replied, sitting down next to Leo and stroking her son's hair. "But I did what I had to do. Now we just wait." David made tea, and they talked about the hearing. Sarah recounted every detail, releasing all the pent-up tension. David just listened, offering the silent, comforting presence that had become so important to her. The next 48 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. She tried to keep busy, playing with Leo, tidying the room, reading, but her mind always went back to the judge's decision. What if he didn't believe her? What if, despite all the evidence, he ruled in Mark's favor? On the morning of the second day, Michael Davis called. "Sarah, the judge has issued his decision. You won. You have full custody of Leo. Not only did Mark lose custody, but he also received a restraining order. He can't come near you or Leo. And there's more, he's going to face criminal charges for everything he did. The DA's office is pressing charges." Sarah felt her legs give out. She had to hold on to the kitchen table to keep from falling. "Is it true, for real?" she asked, barely believing what she was hearing. "It's true. You're free, Sarah. You and Leo are safe." When she hung up the phone, Sarah collapsed into tears. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a relief so profound it felt physical. David ran into the kitchen, alarmed by the sound of her crying, but when he saw Sarah's face, he understood. "You won," he said, more a statement than a question. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. David pulled her into a hug, and she allowed herself to completely fall apart. She cried for everything she had been through, for all the months of fear, for all the nights she thought she would never get out. And she also cried with gratitude, for having found a strength she didn't know she had, for having people by her side who believed in her. Chris arrived an hour later with a small celebration. Nothing extravagant, just a cake from Sarah's favorite bakery and some sodas. They toasted with cups of juice, Leo in Sarah's lap, and for the first time in a long time she allowed herself to truly smile. "This is just the beginning, Sar," Chris said. "Now you can rebuild your life the way you want to, without fear, without looking back." Sarah looked at her brother, at David, at her son in her arms, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real, tangible, possible hope. The following days were lighter. Sarah started making plans. She looked for a job, visited daycares for Leo, thought about going back to school, maybe getting the college degree she always wanted, but never had the courage to pursue. Mark was in jail awaiting trial, and for the first time she could breathe without looking over her shoulder. But the peace lasted less time than she had hoped. It was a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after the court's decision, when Chris called, his voice tense. "Sar, I need you to stay calm. Mark escaped." Sarah felt the blood run cold in her veins. "What do you mean, escaped?" "There was a problem during a transfer between facilities. He took advantage of a moment of carelessness and fled. The police are conducting an operation to find him. But I need you to be on alert. Don't leave the house. Keep the doors locked. I'm going to keep an eye on your street." Sarah hung up the phone with trembling hands. The fear she thought she had left behind came rushing back with full force. Mark was out, and she knew he wouldn't run far. He would come for her. David immediately knew something was wrong. When Sarah told him, he didn't hesitate. "You and Leo will stay in the back room. I'm going to lock all the doors and windows. And if he shows up here, he'll have to get through me first." "But David," Sarah started, but he interrupted her gently. "No buts. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Trust me." And Sarah did trust him, more than she had trusted anyone in years. Chris arrived half an hour later with 2 fellow police officers. They set up a kind of discreet surveillance on the street. Night fell, and Sarah stayed in the back room with Leo, who was thankfully sleeping, oblivious to all the tension. She tried to stay calm, but every noise made her jump. Every car that passed on the street, every gust of wind that rustled the trees. David kept making rounds through the house, checking windows, doors, the backyard. It was almost 3 in the morning when Jessica called Sarah's cell phone. She was crying. "Sarah, I did a terrible thing. I helped him escape. He contacted me a few weeks ago, said if I helped him, we could be together after everything was over. I was an idiot again, but now he's blocked me, used me, and thrown me away. And I heard him talking to someone on the phone. He's coming there. He's going to try to find you. He's going to try to take Leo." Sarah felt panic rise in her throat. "Where is he, Jessica? Where?" "I don't know. He didn't tell me. But he said he knew where you were hiding, that he knew everything. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I messed everything up again." Sarah hung up and ran to warn David and Chris. The tension in the house escalated. Chris called for more backup. The entire street was now under police surveillance, and then, at 4:30 in the morning, they saw him, a figure approaching down the street, trying to stick to the shadows. It was Mark. Chris and his colleagues took their positions. David kept Sarah and Leo protected in the back room. Sarah held her son against her chest, whispering words of comfort more to herself than to the sleeping baby. Mark tried to get in through the back door. When he realized it was locked, he started to force it. The noise was terrible, wood creaking, metal groaning. Sarah covered her mouth to keep from screaming and waking Leo. David was on the other side of the door, waiting. When Mark finally managed to break the lock and get in, David was there. There was no dialogue. Mark was unhinged out of his mind, demanding to see Sarah, demanding his son back. David remained calm, blocking the way to the hallway that led to the room where Sarah was. "You're not getting past me," David said, his voice firm and controlled. Mark tried to force his way through. There was a physical confrontation, quick and intense. David, with his military training, managed to restrain Mark until Chris and the other officers rushed in. Mark was arrested again, this time with much more serious charges: attempted breaking and entering, violation of a court order, escape from custody. The charges piled up, and now there was no lawyer who could save him. When it was all over, when the house was quiet again and Mark was being taken back by the police, Sarah finally came out of the room. She saw the broken door, the overturned furniture, and David with a cut on his face that was bleeding slightly. "You're hurt," she said, rushing to him. "It's just a scratch," David replied, trying to downplay it. "The important thing is that you're both okay." But Sarah wouldn't have it. She got the first aid kit and tended to his wound with trembling but steady hands. And as she cleaned the cut, she realized something. She realized that this man had put his own life on the line for her and for Leo, not out of obligation, not out of empty heroism, but because he genuinely cared. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for being here, for protecting us, for believing in me." David took her hand, stopping her for a moment. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. I'd do it all again without a second thought, because you've become important to me, more important than I ever imagined anyone could be." There was so much to say, so many mixed feelings, but this wasn't the moment. Sarah just nodded, finished dressing the wound, and the two of them sat there on the living room floor, waiting for the sun to rise. Chris returned a few hours later with news. Jessica had turned herself in and was cooperating with the authorities, providing all the details of how she had helped Mark escape. She would be prosecuted too, but her cooperation would be taken into account. "And Mark?" Sarah asked. "He's going away for a long, long time, with all the charges that have piled up. We're talking decades, and this time there will be no escape. He's going to a maximum security facility." Sarah felt an immense weight lift from her shoulders. It was real. It was finally real. She was free. Leo was safe. The nightmare was over. In the weeks that followed, life began to find a new rhythm. Sarah got a job at a children's clothing store in the mall. It wasn't her dream job, but it was a start. It was hers, earned with her own effort, without depending on anyone. Leo was enrolled in a nearby daycare recommended by David, who knew the owner. The baby adapted quickly, and Sarah was surprised to find she could be away from him for a few hours without panicking. The pregnancy was progressing well. Sarah was now in her 8th month, and the doctor said that both she and the baby were healthy. She had decided to name her son Noah, in honor of the father she had lost too soon. David remained a constant presence, but now the relationship between them was changing naturally. There was no longer just gratitude or need. There was genuine affection built day by day in small gestures and big moments. One night after Leo was asleep, Sarah and David were on the porch in what had become their tradition. The sky was full of stars, and Portland was sleeping peacefully outside. "David," Sarah began, looking at her own hands, "I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated to do anything. But I need to be honest." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I've fallen in love with you. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was when you took care of Leo that first night, or when you told me I was stronger than I thought, or maybe it was in all these small moments we've spent together. But it happened. And I understand if you don't feel the same way. I understand if it's too complicated, if I come with too much baggage. But I needed to tell you because I don't want to live hiding what I feel anymore." David was silent for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then he smiled, that small smile Sarah adored so much. "Sarah, do you really think I would let just anyone live in my house? Do you think I would risk my life for just anyone? I've fallen in love with you too, for your strength, for your determination, for the way you love Leo. I was just waiting for you to be ready, waiting for you to heal enough for this to be real, not just gratitude or dependency. Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears, but they were happy tears. And now? Do you think I'm ready? David took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. I think you were always ready. You just needed to believe it. They stayed like that for a long time, holding hands, watching the stars. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't need to. That moment was about a silent promise, about the certainty that they had found in each other something worth building with patience and respect. The days that followed were filled with a lightness Sarah had forgotten existed. She woke up without fear. She went to work with a smile on her face. She picked Leo up from daycare and saw her son happy, healthy, growing up in a safe environment. Mark's trial was set for 2 months later. Jessica, who was fully cooperating with the prosecution, had provided so much information that the DA's office had an airtight case. You're not that woman he manipulated anymore, David said when Sarah expressed her nervousness. You're the woman who survived, who fought, who won. And when you walk into that courtroom, he's going to see that. And David was right. When Sarah walked into the courthouse on the day of the trial, she didn't feel fear. She only felt a distant sadness for the man Mark had chosen to be. The trial lasted 3 days. Sarah testified on the first day, telling her story with a strength that impressed even the prosecutor. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just told the truth with the dignity of someone who had survived to tell it. Jessica also testified, and her testimony was devastating for the defense. I know apologies don't change what I did, Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. But I want you to know that I regret every second of it, and I'm trying to do the right thing, even if it's too late. Sarah nodded in acknowledgement but said nothing. It wasn't up to her to forgive or not forgive. Jessica at that moment. On the 3rd day, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Mark was found guilty on all charges. The sentence was 42 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 15 years. The restraining order was made permanent. When Sarah walked out of the courthouse and breathed the fresh Portland air, she felt that a chapter had finally closed. Not with a fairy tale happy ending, but with justice. Chris hugged her tightly. It's over, Sar. It's really over now. And Sarah completely believed those words. The next month was spent preparing for Noah's arrival. David helped her set up the baby's room, painting the walls a soft blue, assembling the crib, organizing the tiny clothes. It was during one of those afternoons that David asked an unexpected question. Have you thought about finding a place of your own? Sarah stopped, surprised. Do you want me to leave? No, I just want you to know that you can stay here as long as you want. Forever if you want. But I also want you to know that you have a choice. That you're here because you want to be, not because you have to be. Sarah understood the importance of having autonomy. I want to stay, but you're right. So how about we make a deal? I'll stay, but I'll pay a symbolic rent. And when Noah is born and I go back to work, we'll reevaluate. See if this is temporary or if it can be something more permanent. David smiled. Something more permanent. I like the sound of that. Noah was born on a Thursday morning 3 weeks later. The delivery was smooth, and Sarah held her newborn son in her arms with a love so intense it made her forget all. The pain. This baby was the symbol of a new beginning. David was in the waiting room with Leo, and when they were finally allowed in, Leo looked at the baby with curiosity and said his first full word. "Brother," he said, pointing at Noah. Sarah laughed and cried at the same time. Her family, small, unconventional, but hers. And finally, safe. Chris arrived an hour later with flowers and a giant teddy bear. He held his nephew carefully. Welcome to the world, little Noah. You've got a warrior mom, an awesome brother, and an uncle who's going to teach you all about football and how to be a real man. Sarah looked around the hospital room, Chris holding Noah, David sitting with Leo on his lap, and her, tired but happy, surrounded by the people she loved. She had survived. More than that, she had won. And now, with her 2 sons, with her brother, with David by her side, she was ready to write the next chapter of her story. A chapter of peace, of true love, of freedom. The courage that remained was no longer the courage to survive. It was the courage to live fully, to love without fear, to believe that she deserved all the good things life had to offer. 6 months after Noah was born, Sarah looked at the life she had built with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. Some mornings, she still woke up thinking it was all a dream, that at any moment she would be back in that suffocating reality from months ago. But then Leo would appear at her bedroom door asking for breakfast, or Noah would cry for his bottle, and she would remember that this was real. It was hers. It was the life she had earned. Her job at the children's clothing store had become more than just a job. Sarah discovered she had a talent for dealing with customers, for understanding what mothers needed, for offering not just products, but also a friendly word. The store owner, Mrs. Miller, a 60-year-old woman with a heart of gold, had become a sort of mentor. "You have a knack for this, Sarah," Mrs. Miller said one afternoon as they organized the stock. "Have you ever thought about taking a business course? Who knows, maybe one day you'll open your own store." The idea planted a seed in Sarah's mind. She had never thought of herself as an entrepreneur, but why not? Why not dream big? She had survived what many do not. Opening a store seemed challenging, but far from impossible. That evening during dinner, Sarah shared the idea with David and Chris, who had come over for dinner as he did every week. "I think that's awesome," Chris said, helping himself to more rice. "You were always good with numbers. Remember when you managed the household finances when we were teenagers? After Mom and Dad died, you were the one who kept everything organized." David agreed enthusiastically. "And I can help. I have some savings put away. I can invest if you decide to go for it." Sarah felt her eyes well up with tears. Not tears of sadness, but of pure emotion. These people believed in her. They didn't just believe she could survive, but that she could thrive. "I'll think about it seriously," she said, "but first I need to get more settled. I want to make sure I'm doing this for the right reasons, not on impulse." And Sarah was learning that. The difference between acting on impulse and acting with intention. The difference between running from something and walking towards something. These were lessons that her therapy with Dr. Evans was teaching her week after week. Her therapy sessions had become a pillar in Sarah's life. She was learning to recognize patterns, to understand how she had ended up in that situation with Mark, not to blame herself, but to protect herself in the future. She was learning about healthy boundaries, about love that nurtures instead of suffocates, about the difference between partnership and dependency. "Sarah, you need to understand that what happened to you was not your fault," Dr. Evans would repeat whenever necessary. "You were the victim of systematic manipulation, but now you have tools, you have knowledge, and you have the strength to never let anyone treat you like that again." And Sarah truly felt that strength growing inside her every day. Her relationship with David was evolving naturally and respectfully. There were no grand declarations or dramatic gestures, just small moments that added up. A hand holding hers while they watched TV, a soft kiss on the forehead before bed, deep conversations on the porch under the stars that had become a tradition. David never pushed. He never demanded. He never made Sarah feel like she owed him anything for all he had done, and perhaps that was exactly what allowed love to flourish, the absence of obligation, the presence of choice. It was on a particularly starry night, 3 months after Noah was born, that they finally kissed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It just happened. Sarah was talking about a dream she'd had. David was listening intently, and suddenly she realized how much she loved this man, how essential he had become in her life, not out of necessity, but out of genuine connection. She leaned in, and David met her halfway. The kiss was soft, respectful, but full of promise. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "I was waiting for you to be ready," David whispered. "I was waiting too," Sarah replied. And from that moment on, they allowed themselves to be not just housemates, not just friends, but true partners, building something together, at the right pace, with the respect they both deserved. Meanwhile, Jessica was serving her sentence. She had received 3 years of a semi-open regime for her complicity in Mark's escape, but her cooperation and genuine remorse had weighed in her favor. Sarah, in an act of generosity that surprised even herself, wrote a letter to the judge asking for leniency in Jessica's case. "She made terrible mistakes," Sarah wrote. "But she also had the courage to admit those mistakes and help bring about justice. It is not my place to forgive her completely, but I can recognize that she was also, in a way, a victim of Mark's manipulation. And everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing." Jessica, upon learning of the letter, wrote to Sarah. It was a long letter full of apologies and gratitude, promising that when she got out, she would use her experience to help other women recognize the signs of abusive relationships before it was too late. Sarah kept the letter. She didn't reply, not yet ready for that, but she kept it. Maybe one day, when the wounds were completely healed, they could have a real conversation. Leo was growing up too fast. Almost 2 years old now, he ran through the house, said new words every day, and showed a personality that was both strong and sweet. He called David Davy, and the bond between them was so strong that sometimes Sarah had to hold back tears of happiness watching them together. Noah, at 6 months, was a calm and smiley baby. He had Sarah's eyes and a peaceful demeanor that contrasted with Leo's energy. Seeing the two brothers together was Sarah's greatest joy. One Saturday afternoon, Chris showed up with unexpected news. He was dating someone. Her name was Emily. She was a nurse at the same hospital where Sarah had been admitted that fateful night, and they had met when Chris went back to thank the staff who had cared for his sister. "She's special, sir," Chris said with a smile Sarah hadn't seen on her brother's face in years. "And she wants to meet you. She wants to meet the boys." Sarah hugged her brother tightly. "I'm so happy for you, Chris. You deserve to be happy. You did so much for me. It's time for you to live your own life." The meeting with Emily was on a Sunday at Washington Park. Sarah brought Leo and Noah, David came along, and they all spent the afternoon having a quiet picnic. Emily was exactly as Sarah had imagined the perfect person for Chris would be. Calm, intelligent, with a subtle sense of humor and a caring way with the children. "You have a beautiful family," Emily said to Sarah as Leo chased after ducks. "Thank you," Sarah replied, and for the first time when she said that word, family, she didn't feel a tightness in her chest. She just felt peace. The months passed, and life settled into a healthy, happy routine. Sarah enrolled in a night course for a business administration certificate. David watched the kids while she studied, and on weekends they would study together at the kitchen table, Sarah with her accounting books and David with the crime novels he loved. It was during one of these study nights that David asked a question that would change everything. "Sarah, have you ever thought about making this official?" She looked up from her notebook, confused. "Making what official?" "Us, this family we're building." Sarah's heart sped up. She knew where this conversation was going, but she wanted to hear it. David stood up, walked over to her, and knelt beside her chair. There was no ring, no grand production. It was just David being David, honest, direct, true. "I love you, Sarah. I love you, I love Leo, and I love Noah. And I know you've been through terrible things. I know marriage might be a scary word for you. So it doesn't have to be marriage. It can just be a promise. A promise that we'll keep building this together. Officially, as a family," Sarah cried, but they were happy tears. She pulled David up and kissed him, a kiss full of love and gratitude. "Yes," she said when they parted, "yes to everything. To the promise, to the family, to us. And it doesn't scare me anymore, David. Marriage doesn't scare me when it's with the right person. And you are the right person." They were married 3 months later, in a small, intimate ceremony at the Portland courthouse. Only Chris, Emily, Mrs. Miller, and a few close friends were present. Leo was the ring bearer, carrying the rings on a small blue cushion Sarah had sewn. Noah was in Chris's arms, drooling on his uncle's suit, but happy. It wasn't a fairy tale wedding. There was no elaborate white dress or a party for hundreds of people. Sarah wore a simple peach-colored dress. David was in a suit, and they exchanged vows they had written together the night before. "I promise to always respect you," David said. "I promise to never try to control or diminish you. I promise to be your partner, not your owner. I promise to love you on the easy days and the hard ones. And I promise to be the best father I can be to Leo and Noah." "I promise to trust you," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise to communicate when I'm scared, instead of keeping it to myself. I promise to build this life by your side as an equal partner. And I promise to honor the second chance that life has given me." When the official declared them married, the small audience applauded. Leo shouted an excited "Yay!" that made everyone laugh. And Sarah, as she kissed her husband, felt that she had finally arrived at the place she was always meant to be. A place of peace, love, and freedom. Life after the wedding continued to be simple but full. Sarah finished her business course with excellent grades. Mrs. Miller, who was thinking of retiring, offered to sell the store to Sarah on easy terms. With financial support from David and a small bank loan, Sarah became at 26 the owner of her own business. The store thrived. Sarah had a natural talent for understanding what her customers wanted, and her story, which eventually became known in the community, attracted women who saw her as an example of resilience. Many came not just to buy clothes for their children, but also to talk, to ask for advice, to share their own struggles. Sarah never shied away from these conversations. On the contrary, she welcomed them. And when she noticed signs that a customer might be going through what she had been through, she offered not just a friendly word, but also contacts for professionals who could help, numbers for specialized police units, information about shelters. She became, without planning it, a kind of beacon for women in similar situations. And that gave an even greater purpose to everything she had lived through. It hadn't been in vain. It hadn't been just pain. It had also been a lesson she could now use to help others. Leo grew up and started school. He was a happy, sociable child, full of energy. He called David Dad, without anyone having asked or suggested it. It was something natural that came from his heart. And David always made sure to honor that title, attending every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every small achievement. Noah was quieter, more observant. At 3, he loved to draw and could spend hours sitting on the floor of the store drawing while Sarah worked. The drawings were always of families: dad, mom, brother, house, son. The perfect simplicity of a child who knew only love. Chris and Emily got married too, in a wedding a bit larger than Sarah and David's, but just as full of love. And a year later, they announced they were expecting a baby. Sarah cried with happiness knowing she would be an aunt. One Sunday afternoon, 5 years after that fateful night that changed everything, Sarah was on the porch of the house, the one she could now officially call her own, as they had bought the property together. Leo was playing in the yard with a ball, Noah was drawing at the coffee table, and David was grilling for lunch. Chris arrived with Emily and little 2-year-old Sophie, the niece Sarah loved as if she were her own daughter. The family was gathered, laughing, talking, just existing together in a light and happy way. Sarah looked around and felt a gratitude so deep it almost hurt. She looked at David, who smiled at her in that way that always made her feel safe. She looked at her sons, healthy and happy. She looked at her brother, finally at peace with his own life. And she thought about everything that had happened to get to this point. The journey hadn't been easy. There were scars that would never completely disappear. There were still nights when she woke up from nightmares, still moments when a loud noise made her jump. But those scars no longer defined her. They were just part of her story, not the end of it. "You okay?" David asked, sitting down next to her as the barbecue sizzled. "I'm better than okay," Sarah replied, lacing her fingers with his. "I'm happy, truly happy." And it was true. Sarah had discovered that happiness wasn't the absence of pain or trauma. It was the ability to build something beautiful despite them. It was waking up every day and choosing to live fully, to love without fear, to believe that the future could be better than the past. The courage that remained, the one that gave her journey its name, was no longer about surviving. It was about flourishing. It was about taking the broken pieces and turning them into a beautiful mosaic. It was about teaching her sons that falling down isn't the end. It's just an opportunity to get up stronger. When the afternoon ended and everyone had gone home, When the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Sarah and David sat once more on the porch, under the stars that had witnessed so many conversations, so many moments, so many promises. "Thank you," Sarah said suddenly. "For what?" "For reminding me that I deserve to be loved the right way, for showing me that family isn't about blood, it's about choice, for being patient when I needed time, for being strong when I needed protection, for being you." David kissed her forehead. "You don't have to thank me. You saved me just as much as I saved you. You taught me how to live again, how to connect, how to love again. We saved each other. And maybe that's what made their love so special. It wasn't a one-sided rescue where one saved the other. It was a love of mutual construction where two survivors found each other and decided to build something beautiful together." Sarah looked up at the sky, at the infinite stars, and made a silent promise. She promised to live every day with gratitude. She promised to use her story to help other women. She promised to teach her sons about true love, respect, and dignity. She promised to honor the woman she had become, the warrior who survived and the person who chose to love again despite everything. That night, before going to sleep, Sarah went to the boys' room. Leo was sleeping, hugging the teddy bear David had given him on that first day. Noah was on his stomach, his little face turned to the side, breathing softly. She kissed each of their foreheads, whispering words of love that they couldn't hear but that somehow she was sure reached their hearts. These were her sons, her boys, and they would grow up knowing what it was to be truly loved, without conditions, without demands, without fear. They would grow up seeing a strong mother who worked hard to give them a good life. They would grow up with a father who chose to love them even without a blood obligation. They would grow up surrounded by a family that supported them, protected them, and taught them about kindness and respect. Sarah went back to the room she now shared with David. He was already in bed reading a book by the lamplight. When she came in, he put the book aside and opened his arms. Sarah snuggled against his chest, listening to the calm beat of his heart. "What are you thinking about?" David asked, stroking her. "David, hair. I'm thinking about how strange life is, how 5 years ago I was trapped in a situation I thought had no way out, and today I'm here, with you, with my sons safe, with my own store, with dreams for the future. It's almost surreal." David kissed the top of her head. "You fought for this, Sarah. Every step, every hard choice, every moment of courage. You built this life. I was just lucky enough to be here to witness it and be a part of it." Sarah smiled, closing her eyes. Life wouldn't be perfect. There would be challenges. There would be hard days, there would be moments of doubt. But Sarah knew now that she had everything she needed inside her to face any storm. She had love, she had family, she had purpose, and above all, she had herself. A stronger, healed, and free version of herself. And that, in the end, was more than enough. It was everything. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Sarah and David has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of rebuilding courage and true love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most in this story of resilience. Was it Sarah's strength in protecting her children? David's patient love? Chris's loyalty? Share your thoughts with us. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing that even in the most difficult situations, there is always hope for a new beginning. Life can knock us down, but it also teaches us that we have a strength inside us we never knew existed. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions.